When it was announced that George Miller was remaking Mad Max back in the early 2010s, but it wasn't going to star Mel Gibson, it was going to star Tom Hardy, I was kind of like, not too sure about that. But then Fury Road came out and it was f***ing awesome. Cut to 8 or so years later, after Fury Road comes out, and the news comes out that George Miller is doing a Fury Road prequel all about the Furiosa character. I was like, not too sure about that. And then it comes out and it was meh.
As a child, my world was forever changed. And he took it all from me.
So Furiosa is a prequel to Fury Road. It tells the story of a young Furiosa. The character played by Charlize Theron in Fury Road is now played by Anya Taylor-Joy in Furiosa. We meet a young Furiosa. She's about maybe 10 or 12 years old. She's in the Green Place, which is referenced and alluded to in Fury Road. She is abducted by some biker gang members. They take her back to their camp, to their leader, who is played to perfection by Chris Hemsworth.
Who do we have here?
He is playing a character called Dementus. He's on fine scene-stealing / scene-chewing form, delete as appropriate. He's the leader of this gang in the wasteland. He keeps young Furiosa in his cabal with his gang until he meets up with Immortan Joe. Young Immortan Joe obviously from Fury Road. As part of like a trade deal that these two gangs do, Furiosa is handed off to Immortan Joe, and that's how she ends up at the Citadel under the care / guise / guardianship / prisonership of Immortan Joe. That kind of sets up the story. That gets the plot off and running. What follows is kind of a series of gang squabbles between the various gangs in the wasteland. You've got Immortan Joe in the Citadel. You've got Chris Hemsworth gang. You've got a couple of different locations that are mentioned in Fury Road. You've got Gastown and the Bullet Farm. You get to see more of them in this movie, but more on that later. And we see a young Furiosa, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, as she goes through the trials and tribulations to become Charlize Theron in Fury Road. It's almost impossible to talk about Furiosa and do a review about Furiosa without talking about Fury Road and without comparing it to Fury Road. So I'm not even going to try and not do that. I am absolutely 100% going to talk about Fury Road, and I'm going to compare Furiosa to Fury Road. Right off the bat, we need to talk about the inherent problem that you have with prequels, and that is the stakes with prequels are immediately lowered. You know the outcome of the characters. We know that Furiosa doesn't die in Furiosa, spoilers, because she's in Fury Road. We know Immortan Joe and Rictus don't die because they end up in Fury Road. That's one of the problems with prequels in general. And the problem with making a prequel to this specific movie is that Fury Road was and is an absolute modern classic. It is a phenomenal film. A lot of critics named it their top movie of that year, top movie of the decade. I think Empire gave it best movie of the century, but I'm not sure how that works because, you know, there's a lot more years to go in the century. I might be misremembering that, but I'm sure they put it on the cover that it was the movie of the century. Maybe it was just decade. Anyway, so while any George Miller directed Mad Max movie is a welcome thing, I think a lot of people, myself included, would have preferred a sequel to Fury Road and not a prequel to Fury Road. Let me know if you would have preferred that as well in the comments below. I think it was James Dyer, I think in the Empire Film Podcast, put it best when he talked about Furiosa's character. When we meet Furiosa's character in Fury Road, she's already a fully formed character. We don't need to know much of the backstory. It's hinted to, it's alluded to, it's talked about a little bit, but you see her, you get what the character's about right away with very little dialogue, with very little exposition, with no like extended flashback sequences or anything like that. We don't need the backstory fleshed out to the extent that it is. When you explain the mythology to that extent, you take away the mythology of the mythology. Do you take away the mythology? Just taking something away from the myth of that character, which, yeah, we don't always need to know backstory. Like, you know, the Joker in The Dark Knight, we know nothing about his backstory. he's just a brilliant character. Anya Taylor-Joy does an admirable job as young Furiosa. Looks-wise, you can see how, that person grows up to be Charlize Theron. So there's no disconnect in that sense. However, I couldn't help but think as I'm watching Furiosa, like, why couldn't Charlize Theron just have played Furiosa in this Furiosa prequel? I don't know whether that was even an option. I don't know whether she wanted to, whether she was offered the role and turned it down. But I did keep thinking to myself, Charlize Theron could easily have played young Furiosa. And as I said, Chris Hemsworth steals the show here. He walks a fine line between over-the-top, crazy bad guy chewing the scenery and nuanced, tortured, past bad guy. There's a couple of scenes in this specifically where he does really subtle things that allude to the fact that, he wasn't always like crazy bad guy. He probably had a normal life. The circumstances have led him to be Dementus, and he's kind of stuck in this role, and he can't get out of this role. Like, the events of the world surrounding him, the events of the people surrounding him have forced him into being Dementus, and he's stuck playing that. It kind of reminded me of Negan in The Walking Dead, of Jeffrey Dean Morgan's portrayal of Negan in that sense. And speaking of sense, what would be sensible is a wee sub to the channel. Thank you very much. The supporting cast are really good. Also, the various henchmen and lieutenants of the various gangs, they're kind of wonderfully weird and nuanced in their performances and in their characters' names. As I mentioned earlier on, to name but a few, we've got History Man, we've got the Organic Mechanic, we've got Rictus Erectus, we've got Scrotus, to name but a few. So yeah, both the actors and the characters are fleshed out and portrayed quite well in this. I don't want to go too off-road, pun intended, into spoiler territory, but there is a character that's introduced about halfway through the movie, ends up being quite an important character, but because he's introduced so late in the movie, I just feel like the relationship that he has with the surrounding characters and with the story in general, it isn't earned. It's kind of like, not shoehorned in, but I feel like it comes a little bit too late in the movie for the audience to fully care about that character and fully care about that character's relationships with Furiosa and with the story and the plot. That's not to say that there's nothing to like about this movie. There's a lot to like about this movie. One of the things that stands out in a positive way about Furiosa and about, Mad Max movies in general is the dialogue. The language that the characters use is very what's the word? It's like unique to their universe. They're speaking English. It's Earth. It's our world. It's just a post-apocalyptic version of our future. So even though they're speaking English, they use certain words, and the phrases and the cadence of their speak is just different enough for us to be like, that's weird. We don't talk like that. But they've obviously developed into talking like that as the world has developed into the wasteland around them, and that's a nice little subtle touch that really just, that among other things helps really sell the otherworldliness of this reality of the Mad Max wasteland. CGI, there seems to be a lot more use, or at least there's a lot more obvious use of CGI in Furiosa when compared to Fury Road. The look of Fury Road was quite gritty, quite grainy, quite, literally dirty. This one feels like a much cleaner movie. There's a video gamey, Avatar-y type look and feel to it that I didn't get when watching Fury Road. I don't know whether that was a conscious choice or not, because, it is set, 20 odd years ish prior for the most part, or for part of it anyway. So maybe that was a conscious choice, or maybe that's just, improving technologies and the way the cinematographer and George Miller wanted to make this movie look and feel. But it does look and feel a little bit cleaner and more polished than Fury Road, and I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. Pace-wise, it's very different from Fury Road as well. Lengthwise, it's different also. Fury Road clocked in at just under 2 hours, I think, but that was 2 hours of just non-stop, relentless chase movie. Fury Road is a chase movie from minute 1 to minute 120, and then they just pepper in the story and the characters and design and plot design and character development throughout that chase movie, and the way they kind of weave those character moments and story in to the chase is masterfully done. It's 2 hours, but it's just relentless. It's non-stop. Furiosa, on the other hand, clocks in at, I think, just under 2.5 hours. I think IMDb's got it as 2 hours and 28 minutes. And it definitely feels like a 2.5 hour movie. As I said, it's much slower paced, deliberately so, than Fury Road. It's chaptered. I think there's 5 or 6 or maybe 7 chapters in the movie, and each chapter has a title. They come up on screen. I can't remember any of them. I think the first one is called something like The Pole of Inescapism or something like that. That's not it, but it's a little bit pretentious, and I thought an unnecessary. It kind of reminded me of Zack Snyder's Justice League, of early Tarantino, where you've got the title cards for chapters throughout the movie. And I just think that kind of, anytime you're doing that, unless it's essential to the plot, it just takes you out of the story. Like, it reminds you you're watching a movie instead of just letting you experience the movie. So yeah, we don't need these chapter markers, guys. Just show the movie. There's also plenty of action in this movie, even though it is a slower paced film. There's a good 2 or 3 like top end action sequences. There's one that's very, very reminiscent of Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. I don't think that's an accident. I think that was designed as such a way to kind of be reminiscent of and pay homage to The Road Warrior. So that was a treat to see. The score by Tom Holkenborg, aka or FKA, formerly known as, or does he still go by? Anyway, he used to go by Junkie XL. Tom Holkenborg is his name. He does the score for this movie. He also did the score for Fury Road and Zack Snyder's Justice League, as I mentioned earlier on. Similarly, the score is more subdued and more slow than Fury Road. It's not as bombastic. It didn't hook me as much as Fury Road, apart from the cues that are, the same cue or, very similar cues from Fury Road. There's one track from the Fury Road score in particular. It's called Brothers in Arms. It's a brilliant piece of music, piece of film music that made its way onto my film score playlist right away, and it's been genuinely on my Spotify playlist ever since Fury Road came out. I listen to that track anytime I'm listening to movie scores. I think it's actually on one of my gym playlists as well. It's a brilliant piece of music. But again, that's from Fury Road, not Furiosa. It's another thing that just reminds you that Fury Road is a much better film. So I'm going to go with 6 out of 10 for Furiosa. Perhaps I went in with too high expectations. I was kind of hoping for and expecting a Fury Road type experience. Furiosa is not a Fury Road experience. So if you bear that in mind when you go and see it, you might have a better time than I did. But as I said, any George Miller directed Mad Max movie is a movie that I will happily pay my money and go and see. Even if it's not got Mad Max in it, I'll happily go and see a George Miller directed action car movie, because Jesus, does he know how to make an action car movie. That's us, folks. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button. If you want to see more content like this, you can always subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.